That should fix it. Okay, so the purpose of this live stream is A, to test OBS software and to try to learn a little more about how to do live streams. I have some ideas related to AI that I would love to turn into a discussion with you guys online. The other discussion, or kind of the main conversation for this live stream, is going to be two philosophical dilemmas from from the philosophy of religion and also the philosophy of ethics. Yes, I'm very welcome. Thanks for giving some feedback on the muting. I hadn't set up an audio source yet. Like I said, trying to figure out OBS software. So the two philosophical dilemmas, I'm going to run through them really fast. Euthyphro is one of the philosophical dialogues that Plato put together. Everything we know about Socrates comes through Plato. It's all filtered through him. And the dialogue goes like this. Socrates is waiting for his trial. He's about to be brought in front of the agora and have this trial where he's going to be, accused of corrupting the youth and being impious and teaching the youth to worship, an unknown god. And as he's waiting in line for his turn in the trial, he runs into somebody else who's there for court, and that's Euthyphro. And Euthyphro considers himself to be a very pious individual. He is actually going to court to prosecute his own father for murder, and that is a huge tension thing in ancient Greece, because there's so much duty that you owe to your parents to protect them and to take care of them and to honor them and respect them, that to prosecute your own father is a huge deal. And so, what kind of duty would bring Euthyphro to prosecute his own father? The situation for Euthyphro, getting into the weeds a little bit, is that his father had some difficulties disciplining a slave who, if I remember correctly, had stolen some things. And so he tied him up and left him in an area while going to get the authorities. And the slave died while being tied up. And so Euthyphro says, well, this is murder because my father was responsible for this guy, and he tied him up and he was the cause of his death, so that's murder, and he needs to be prosecuted for murder, and I'm going to be pious and devout and honorable and do this thing, prosecute my dad. And so he says, this is piety. And Socrates comes back and says, good, I'm glad that I have an expert in piety here. And he warms up his Socratic debate, his Socratic style of questioning, to try to find out the truth of the matter, and says, can you teach me what piety is? Can you teach me where it comes from? And they go into a discussion. And in this discussion, Euthyphro tries to give a definition of piety. Piety is what the gods love. And Socrates says, well, that definition doesn't work for a couple of reasons. First of all, the gods in ancient Greece argue amongst themselves what one god may find pious, another finds impious. So in that case, is the same act both pious and unpious? And they cycle around this question a little bit. And then he says, and that raises another problem. Is the act pious because the gods like it? Or do the gods like it because it is pious? And one of the ways that this dialogue and this dilemma has been kind of passed down to the modern generation is a question of, is something that is good because God likes it, or is it good or does God like it because it is good? What is the relationship between the divine and the good? And this gets very complicated as soon as you introduce ideas of omnipotence in kind of the classic sense that theologians have debated omnipotence. That raises its own set of philosophical dilemmas, like if God is omnipotent, as in he can literally do anything, does that include rewriting the rules of what is possible? So could God make a rock? Yes. Could God make a rock so big that? Yes. Could God make a rock so big that he himself could not lift it? And if you say yes, then there's something that he can't do. And if you say no, then there's something that he can't do. You run into all kinds of contradictions there. My take on the Euthyphro's dilemma is that the moral law predates God. It's something that God himself must obey. And part of the support that I take for that is a couple of scriptures from the Book of Mormon, where there's a couple of verses that say that under certain conditions, if God failed to abide by certain aspects of the moral law, that he would cease to be God. So it puts the moral law above God. And then omnipotence is understood to mean something other than kind of this mind-bending, can do literally anything, including make all evil and pain disappear at the blink of an eye. Instead, it becomes God has sufficient power to fulfill all of his promises. Has extreme superlative capacity, but not in kind of the logic-breaking sense that the law itself can be altered. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. If you are watching this live stream, I would love to turn this into a discussion, not just me talking to my computer. I enjoy talking, don't get me wrong, but throw in your comments. I'd love to riff off of that a little bit. This idea that there are moral principles, that there is a reality behind God, that God is obedient to, even as we seek to be obedient to him, at least in my religious paradigm, is correct. That's exactly what I'm saying. I think that God's relationship to the moral law is kind of complicated. I think some parts of it predate him, and that he himself, his godhood is conditioned on his obedience to those principles. And he has proven himself to be utterly consistent, the same yesterday, today, and forever, as the scripture goes. But it is fundamentally, his godhood is fundamentally conditioned on obedience. And there's other aspects of the moral law where God, in his role as a father to us and as a teacher to us, can establish things like, is driving on the left side of the road or the right side of the road morally required? Is that part of the natural law? No, but if you drive on the wrong side of the road, is that immoral? Yes, you're putting people at risk in the context in which you live. We've agreed to arbitrarily decide right side or left side. And depending on what country you're in, that could flip. If you go over to the UK, assuming that you're in somewhere that drives on the right side of the road, then suddenly you have to reorient and drive on the left side in order to not become a public menace. Whereas if you're in the United States, then you drive on the right side of the road and not the left, so that you won't be a public menace. I think there are some aspects of the moral law that are good because God has established them, but there are other parts that God himself must be obedient to. So yeah, Apollo, thanks for the comment. I really appreciate that. Let's get in there and discuss that. This idea bleeds right into the problem of evil. I'll set up the problem of evil and then I'll give my take on it. The problem of evil is a contradiction that arises. It's a problem in the sense that it's a philosophical dilemma. The traditional attributes of God are that he is omnipotent, meaning he can do anything, and that's typically understood to be the can you make a rock so big that he can't lift it? Could he make a rock so big that he couldn't lift it? In that superlative can rewrite any rule he wants style. And you can kind of see where I'm going with this. The second attribute of God is that he is beneficent or desires good for humanity. He has a good will, is charitable, and desires good things for humanity and for the world. And the third is that God is omniscient, meaning he knows all things. And so and then the fourth premise of this dilemma is that evil exists in the world. And so the traditional way the problem is set up is that if God is capable of getting rid of evil, and if he is aware of that evil through omniscience and has a desire to get rid of that evil, then evil should not exist. And yet it does. So somewhere there's a contradiction here. And my take on the problem of evil is mixed. So a couple of traditional takes are that evil actually doesn't exist. What we're referring to as evil is pain, or that evil serves some sort of greater good. I believe that in part. So I think that pain is necessary for growth. Growth requires doing hard things. I was just talking with my kids the other day. We were reading a book called The Candy Shop War by Brandon Mull. And it's a great book series. We read book 1, then rapidly went through book 2, and then we found out there's a book 3, so of course we're reading that one right now. And the book contains a a problem. The characters are offered a chance to live forever in a dream state where anything they imagine happens, and anything they desire, they get that fast. And, that's a really appealing idea. In philosophy, that's sometimes referred to as the experience machine. If you could step into an experience machine that could grant you whatever experience you wanted and have it be absolutely indistinguishable from reality, why wouldn't you do it? Because if it's indistinguishable from reality, I mean, it kind of is reality, so just go there and be happy, right? And I talked with my kids about the difference between things that you have and things that you are. Things that you have can be taken away again. So in this dream state, excuse me, I'm grabbing a tissue. In a dream state, you could have anything you want, but could you grow under those conditions? If you want to grow in courage, you cannot ever, let's set up a couple premises. The way that you get better at anything is by practice. If you want to get better at being lazy, practice. If you want to get better at being courageous, practice. If you want to get better at the piano, practice. Better at kung fu, practice. Better at law work or reading or writing or thinking, practice. Better at noticing things, practice. And a lot of the virtues that we really care about in order to be a well-developed human being are only practicable in uncomfortable conditions. Classic example of that is patience. When do you practice patience? In a moment when you would be very tempted to not be patient. Basically in times when you're waiting, when there's a gap between the thing that you desire and the thing that you have. And the state where you're at now. Or courage. If you want to practice being brave, you can only really practice that when you're uncomfortable or afraid. You never get a chance to practice it otherwise. And so, in the experience machine, or living in a perpetual dream state, could you grow? I mean, technically you could wish for opportunities to challenge yourself like this, but it would be extremely difficult to pull off. Your chances of pulling that off would be much, much lower, especially if the dream state was calibrated toward your desires and not toward, necessarily what's good for you. So some of the pain that we experience in life I see as being essentially weights. We're here to be in the gym. One of the purposes of life is to gain experience in a very neutral way, to just taste reality as it is. Another reason we're here on Earth, one of the purposes of life, as I take it, is to grow. And I don't think that's possible without a certain amount of resistance. You can't go to the gym, eliminate the weights, and then replace them all with styrofoam and get the same gains. It doesn't work that way. So in that sense, a lot of the evil that we experience in the world, or pain, is toward a greater good. There's other aspects of pain too, where there is total evil in terms of people doing absolutely evil, horrible things to other humans. And a lot of the pain that we experience in life isn't just weight training pain. It's childhood cancer and eye worms is the classic example. The documentary guy, his name is escaping me for the moment, Richard Attenborough, mentions eye worms. I've experienced some of that. I've had 2 of my children have close runs with death as babies. One of my sons had cancer, and another one required emergency brain surgery. So it's not that I'm unfamiliar with that. But part of the idea that sort of evil is maybe acceptable in the greater scheme of things is that if you dissolve a lifetime of pain into an eternity, then the solution to pollution is dilution, as they say. And so it can become insignificant by comparison. However, I think some of the issues regarding malevolence are harder to get rid of. Why is it that there are cruel, twisted, sadistic people allowed to do cruel, horrible, sadistic things in the world? Why isn't that stopped? Why wasn't Hitler stopped during World War II? That kind of thing. And there is a fundamental principle that I think is absolutely critical. This is something that I take from my faith tradition, is the idea that agency, meaning human ability to make choices, is critical in order for whatever this life is in order to function, both as a test and also as a growth experience. Um, that principle of agency predates God. It is one of those truths that God himself cannot abridge without violating something so fundamental that he would cease to be God. And so, they have the classic three contradiction with pain: omniscience, omnipotence, and goodwill. And I think evil, not all evil is desirable to get rid of. We want to keep the weights. And those parts of evil that seem like God should want to get rid of, like maleficence, evil desires of bad people, um, are necessary. The freedom to commit such wrongs is necessary in order for the plan of salvation to function. Yeah, I do. So two awesome comments that we have here. We've got Pineberry212. My stance is that, and I'm quoting, my stance is that we are here to grow as well, and part of growing is choice and dealing with the choice of others, deciding to be better or to grow from facing evil being put into you. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to read Apollo's comment and then jump into that. Apollo, does some of this boil down to God letting us execute free will? Yeah, I think both of those are spot on, and they line up really neatly with what I think on this as well. It's interesting to me that so much of what we choose and so much of what makes for a good, virtuous human being are virtues related to other people's choices, like the trust component of marriage. Marriage is incredibly scary. It's kind of like the prisoner's dilemma, which is another one of these philosophical problems. That one comes from game theory. And, you imagine two criminals getting caught shortly after, a bank robbery, and one gets put in cell A, one gets put in cell B. They're separated so they can't talk, and then the prosecutor comes and offers a plea deal to each one of them if they're willing to rat out the other. And there is this immediate benefit if they rat out the other. But if both rat each other out, then both of them suffer extra. And if neither rats out, then the prosecutor doesn't have enough evidence to convict either. So the best possible outcome, clearly, is that they don't rat out. But both of them, under conditions of uncertainty, where the trust is placed against, and where they can see that the other can get a massive benefit if they let me set it up slightly better. So the classic way it's set up is that if neither rats out the other, they will both serve a year of prison time for a lesser offense that prosecutors do have enough evidence to convict for. If they do rat out the other, then they go away scot-free, while the other spends 7 years in prison or something like that. And if both rat each other out, then they will both spend 7 years in prison. So at that point, there is a personal benefit in ratting out the other, but that personal benefit, assuming both take it, makes both of them suffer. And marriage tends to work in this sort of way where you both have to be absolutely all in order to get the benefit, in order to get the max benefit, but both of you have incentives that will try to drive you away. And these kind of trust falls are everywhere in the development of virtue and good character. And that kind of trust fall is only a thing because of the free will of other people. We can't control them. We can't predict them. We don't know what other people are going to choose. And so fundamentally, our lives are built on leaps of faith, even socially, before we even get to the big philosophical questions of the universe. And it's unavoidable. Do you have other thoughts? I'd love to hear your take on both of these. I have really enjoyed thinking through this. Here's another thought that gets a little crazier. The easy attack in the problem of evil is to attack God's goodness, is to say that God is not good. God is somehow cruel or arbitrary or a bad moral example. And there's an idea in right in Genesis that God makes a creation and then says that it is good. And for a human being to say that requires a huge leap of faith. The Taoists in China go even further in some ways. They say that the Tao is, it's kind of hard to pin down philosophically, is the Tao the way things should be, or is it the way things are? And the Taoist will say yes. In the classic picture of the vinegar tasters, there's kind of a theme that many Chinese painters have made a depiction of. Kind of like the mother and child in Western art. There's just a million pictures of the mother and child and a million pictures of, Christ on the cross. It's a theme that gets picked up over and over and over and over again. In ancient China, one of these themes is three old guys standing around a barrel of vinegar with their finger out like they just tasted it and a facial expression that shows how they feel about the vinegar. And one of them represents the Buddha, one of them represents Confucius, and another one represents Lao Tzu. And Apollo, I see your comment. I'll get to that in just a second. In the vinegar tasters, the Buddha is shown with a face that's very bitter. He tastes the vinegar as bitter and unpleasant, and his solution to life is to detach from desires so that you can achieve a state of nirvana. And then Confucius has a taste like it's sour. What he tastes the vinegar as is corruption. It should be wine, but it's not. It's become soured and corrupted, and he seeks to remedy the ills of society by fixing them. And then Lao Tzu, the Taoist, just has a big silly happy grin. He's like, yeah, that's vinegar. That's what vinegar is supposed to be. It's doing vinegar. And right now, I'm happy that I have vinegar. And that kind of faith, not only in the goodness of God, but in the goodness of the reality behind God, is a really cool thing. Okay, Apollo. Quote, I believe the current ideal strategy with repeated prisoner dilemma experiments is to trust until wronged, but also to show forgiveness afterwards. Correct. In game theory, there's a huge difference between repeated games and non-repeated games. If the game is not going to be repeated, the ideal strategy is to scam the other person. But if the game is going to be repeated, then the ideal strategy is to cooperate until wronged, reciprocate, and then get back to get back to cooperation as quickly as possible. Veritasium has an excellent video on it. I keep seeing it in my feed. I really want to watch it. I've enjoyed his videos. Recently, I had a chance to meet him. I went to Open Sauce this year on the invitation of Andy from How to Make Everything, and that was a wild, incredible, amazing experience. I actually have my badge here as a memento. I keep it in my office. And, it was wild. I had a chance to thank him, Veritasium, Derek from Veritasium, for his video on falsification, which I think is still one of the best videos that's been done on that topic. It's a fun one. He does this puzzle where people are asked to guess the rule behind a sequence of numbers, and he uses it as a way to show typical way we approach this kind of strategy using confirmation bias versus the type of falsification thinking that would actually yield new useful information. And I love it. I used it when I taught high school science. It was my first job out of college, and that video was incredibly helpful to be able to get the idea across. All right, do we have any other comments? I haven't bottomed out everything I have to say on this, but that's the sketch of the idea. Basically, I believe personally in a reality behind God, that God's creation of the world is, frankly, I don't even know if it's a simulation, but conditioned on principles that predate and stand behind and support God. So that's my take on that, both the Euthyphro dilemma and the problem of evil. It's a big mystery. There's a lot of stuff I don't understand about that. A bunch of questions like, if God didn't create the universe, then what did? I have no idea. I'm not even sure how to begin answering a question like that. I think the bigger deal for me is, in my opinion, the only philosophical questions that really matter are the ones that have bearing on how to live better. That's why I named the channel Good and Basic, is because I'm really interested in values, and especially dirt under the fingernail values. I love theory. I think it's fun, but fundamentally the question is, how do you live well? And that's not a question you get to skip out on, because you're living now. You're spending your time now. So it'd be good to know how to do it well and get the good life. Other thoughts? I'd love to see a couple more comments before we close out. Otherwise, we'll close out in about 2 minutes. thank you for your discussion. I really appreciate you being here. And we will do more live streams like this. So far, so good. We got one microphone to work. Next time, we'll try a few things and see if we can't make it even better. Apollo. I am personally agnostic theistic, so I believe that God is inherent in everything, and there must be something larger than us. How do we reconcile a universal God but so many mutually exclusive religions? Uh, I'll give you my take. So, my take on that is that there are fundamentally only two ways to learn about God. One of them is conjecture, and the other is experience. So, the conjecture one is, what we're doing now. It's the theological, philosophical discussion, guesses. We can guess, or we can go straight to the source. I don't think there is any way to uh, know God other than revelation, meaning direct contact. And um, that can be dim. A lot of revelation that human beings experience and inspiration, genius, as the Greeks called it, is subtle. It's vague. It's the idea that just pops into your head that doesn't seem to have come from you, that is just the right thing at the time. I think that process of revelation can become extremely clear and explicit under certain circumstances, typically when we're ready for it. There is, a repeated idea in the Bible: "Ask and you shall receive; knock and it shall be opened unto you." Also from the Bible, there's the idea in James 1:5 that if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. Next verse says, "But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering." I think um, funny idea straight from The Mask of Zorro. Oh, classic source of wisdom there. Love that movie. Um, the old Zorro meets the young Zorro when the young Zorro is drunk. And the young Zorro almost gets in a fight that would get him killed, but the old guy saves him by beating him up. And he says, when the student is ready, the master will appear. And I believe that that is absolutely true. And I'm not sure exactly how it works, but when you want to know something, when you really are ready, the opportunities will be given to you. And you will be given sources that will let you find out who God is and what he's like. Pineberry212, as an LDS, if you look at it objectively, technically it is a simulation experience, since the point is to learn and grow as people. But that is a wide view. Kinda. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how to take that. There's some statements from Joseph Smith that I chew on and have no clue what they mean. In philosophy, you've got kind of the main 5 branches. You've got logic, which is really clear and very objective. How well does a series of supporting statements support a conclusion? You've got epistemology, you've got ethics, you've got metaphysics, and you've got aesthetics. And epistemology is a lot of fun, so is metaphysics. Metaphysics would be what the simulation experience, puzzler is about. Is this real? When we say real, what do we actually mean? I'm not sure that it really matters. And the statement from Joseph Smith that I chew on is that, in the Doctrine and Covenants, there's a revelation that says that never at any time have I given you a purely material commandment. They've all been spiritual. I don't know if that means simulation or if that means non-simulation. I have no idea. Pineberry212, it is a wide and simplified view. I mean, kind of. If we're here to gain experience, then does it really matter if it's a simulation or not? Not really. Totally could be. I think it's really interesting that we can't disprove that. And a simulation would be interesting because if you write a computer program, you can control the physics in that program, right? You can rewrite any rule. You can rewrite the order of events. You can see it all before you at the same time. It kind of squares with some things that some LDS, some Latter-day Saint doctrines related to God's omniscience. So that's an interesting idea. Fundamentally, I don't know. I like to think about it. If you have more thoughts on that, I'd love to see them. Please leave them in a comment in one of the other videos. I'd read all of those. Pineberry, Apollo, thank you for your comments. I really appreciate you both. And we will do another live stream next week. See you guys later.